So, in this part of the lesson, I want to focus on some of the resources on Moodle under week 10 that can help you in your action research project. So now we've reached week 10, and next week, week 11, and in weeks' time, week 12 in 2 weeks, we're going to focus on how you can finalise your action research project in order to fully develop your action research project. One of the things that we've emphasised so far is that you don't have to have students to work with or teachers to interview or a school to work with. You can just collect the material from literature studies of the best scholarly literature relating to the topic that you have chosen in mathematics or literature that you're working with. At the same time, you need to propose some actions that you could take in a school that would improve student performance. And you also need to propose some way of collecting data that measure the success of your actions, and then some way of analysing that data to see how effective you were. And so I suggest that at the end of your project, you propose at least 2 or 3 actions that you could take using your literature review material to help improve students' achievement in the area you're looking at, and that you also propose ways of gathering the data through interviews or through surveys or through student tasks or other activities that would gather data, and then you look at the ways the data could be analysed and the way the data could be studied and the way you could act on the findings, because that's what action research is all about. And I suggest that right at the beginning of your project and at the end of your project, you talk about the importance of actions by teachers and action research that measures the success of these actions. So here in week 10, we're starting to draw together all of the material that we have collected, and we're starting to think about how in action research you need to gather data and analyse the data. And so firstly, we began talking about a problem. So you may be studying business studies and the use of mathematics in business studies, or the use of budgeting in business studies. We want to understand problems. Why don't students do well? And then we conduct a literature review to look at underlying theories and knowledge as to why students don't do so well and how we can help them to do well. And then we set up methods to study what we're thinking about. And so if students don't do well because of motivation, we think of ways to improve motivation. If students don't do well because of fear, we try and reduce fear. If students don't do well because they don't have the skills and knowledge, we try and increase the skills and knowledge. So we set up methods to bring about actions, and then we research the success of these actions. What methods could be used? We could look at educational theory, which looks at the way students learn, and we notice students may not all be as fast as each other, and so we could have slower pace of learning. So we look at education theories, and you could look at Piaget and other education theories and look at how that affects learning. Now, if you're looking at language and English, then we might look at specific aspects, whether it be primary school or secondary school, that help us understand how students do well or why students struggle and how we can help them. If you're looking at mathematics, you look at the causes of the difficulty and you come up with methods to help them. And we can look beyond educational theories to other theories like sociology and psychology and neuroscience. And then as Christians or from other religious backgrounds, we then might have a little little paragraph or so on our own personal experience of, could be our religion and how this helps people. And we could write a paragraph about that. And you could also write a paragraph about other dominant religions, like in Australia, Christianity could be another dominant religion. And there could be versions of Christianity like evangelicalism or Catholicism, etc. You could write about that too if you had space, but just a paragraph reflecting on your experiences and some other dominant social settings can be useful there. How will you present the data? You could briefly describe how the data could be gathered and how it could be presented in tables and graphs and how you could discuss it. And then when you gather findings from your data about the methods you could use in your actions and action research, you could think about how you look for themes and look for patterns. And we often call these themes and patterns codes. And so you could look at coding. And often when you start to read through interviews and look at how students are going, you begin with 5 and then 10 and then 15 and 20, and you discover there's lots of information. You then need to narrow these codes down from 20 to 15 to 10 to 5 so that you focus on a small number of areas again. And coding can help you, where it's just trying to look for patterns and use codes like ABCD or motivation or information or knowledge or family background. So you use codes to describe the major ideas that you find from your literature review. And then when you get round to actions, the data you gather from your interviews and from your student data. You also want to keep on reflecting on the information you get from the literature review, and you can do a mind map and develop some ideas there. Your own personal reflections is sometimes called an autoethnography. What's worked in your own life? What struggles have you had to deal with? Interviews with teachers if you have opportunity, and studies of how schools and how certain states in Australia or education systems approach things. And then if you want to interview students, then you'd want to get approval, an ethics approval and approval from the school and parents in order to study those students. And then whether your data comes from your literature or from actual interviews, you then need to discuss how would it be analysed and how would it be analysed and how would it be worked through. And then finally, you could look at implications for practice. That is, in the classroom, what are the things that we can do to apply this? So this material I've taken from Spencer Clark and Susan Perath in their book on action research, which you can find if you type this into Google, and you'll find it's an open, readily available textbook. And we're looking at chapter 7 in particular, but if you want to look at the other chapters as well, then you can find them very useful. And so I encourage you to think about engaging with all of the chapters in these books. But this is a particularly useful text book on action research by Spencer Clark and Susan Perath from Kansas State University. And you can see some great insights there that you can use. And so the chapters are available there, and I encourage you to have a look at these different chapters and the material there. So that's all available online, and you can read and engage with these different chapters. And here are the chapters that you can look at that discuss the nature of action research, collecting the data and analysing the data, which we're focusing on this week, and then sharing your results, which we'll be focusing on next week and the week following. And then the other sections we've looked at in previous week ask the question, what is action research? How do you plan an action research project? How do you collect information from the literature review? And how do you prepare to carry it out? And then how do you put it into practice when you've got results? So all of these sorts of things can be included in your project. So I encourage you to think about those. They also offer in chapter 7 some further guidance on the writing process. That is, always give some background to the study. That is, who are you as the author of the study? What's the context? What sort of teaching will you work in? What sort of schools will you work in? Why do you have an interest in the particular subject that you're interested in? Because readers will want to relate to the study and that which you write by getting to know you a little bit and what motivates your writing. And clearly present your aims, your intentions, your purposes in your study, but be specific and detailed. You can talk about using information technology, but what specific types of information technology and why does it work and why is it useful and what have 3 or 4 scholars or more scholars said about this information technology and why it works. Always clearly present your aims, your intentions, your purposes, and situate your study where you are situated so that people can know some of the background. Don't be afraid to describe the processes, the successes and challenges that could be faced. Be real, be open, be honest, be transparent and authentic in what you write about. Own what you're writing about. Be humble, but at the same time be clear and concisely describe what you're seeking to do and the reasons for doing it. Usually we write in the first person, in the third person. That is, this study will seem to focus on a certain area. So you write usually in the third person, but sometimes you may want to write in the first person. So I would suggest write in the third person, but on occasion, sometimes you will write in the first person in order to give an authenticity. And so the paragraph on my experience could be in the first person, but much of the material we would suggest at tertiary level is in the third person. Readers may not know everything about your subjects, such as economics. We were talking before, if you had a paragraph on a brief history of economics and the contribution of a couple of the famous economists, then you could include that there, give a bit of background to what economics is all about. Use subheadings if that's helpful, but remember all subheadings should be able to be removed and it still makes sense. So don't over depend or lean on your subheadings. Acknowledge your own prior assumptions, but don't over dwell on them. Go on to balance different views from different perspectives and different scholars. Some of the other resources that you could look at include Clark, Porrath, Thiel and Job. They're writing on action research, analysing data. Other material you could discuss is coding, and so you could have a paragraph on coding. You could also have a paragraph on evidence and general knowledge. And all of these things are going to be important. So you'll find all of these details on Moodle, and you can look at these details on Moodle to get further information as well. We're reminded that in your project you want a nice introduction, a discussion of the methods, discussion of the results, a discussion of the data that you would collect, and then finally you summarise what's happening and you offer recommendations as to how things might work in the future. So that's just a brief introduction to some of the things that we're seeking to cover in this week, week 10. This Zoom meeting is now going to conclude. So we're going to exit again, and then just for the last 10 minutes to 15 minutes, we'll come back and I'll ask you to reconnect for the final Zoom session today. For the last 15 minutes or so, we'll reconnect starting shortly. So see you shortly when you rejoin us back on Zoom. Thank you.